Hi everyone, my name is Maggie Marquis. I work with an environmental nonprofit here in town called the Delta Institute. I work on a series of projects related to environment and agriculture, specifically reducing the environmental outcomes from some of the big ag that we know surrounds us. Reducing and improving, let me say. But let me go ahead and get started and tee some things off for our panelists. Something that I think that you'll see as we start to hear from all of them is that they are all out in the communities, as Leslie said. They are doing innovative work, and they're making really creative linkages between improvements in food and food production with other goals and groups that they work with, ranging from things focused on environmental sustainability to employment opportunities, to youth education. So my hope is that everyone leaves this panel with an idea of how they can take some of these things back into their own communities and get everyone thinking about ways to ignite enthusiasm and change around food in the groups that you already work with. So without further ado, I maybe wanted to start with Steve Carter. He works with the kitchen community, and in learning about your experience and reading some of your bio and everything, I was struck with how you're really out there getting dirty and connecting with kids, working in gardens, helping them engage with their food. What do you see happening and what do you want to happen with those kids when they leave the classrooms that you're helping to take root? No pun intended.
Well, first I think it's very important to get as many students involved as possible. And so we start that right from the beginning. When we're installing the garden, there's a lot of opportunity to move soil, to plant seeds, to water immediately, right off the bat, the first day when we're there. And the school will set up a watering schedule where just a few classes will come out and water. The main function of that, as far as like education and keeping the garden going, I think is enthusiasm, generating enthusiasm for being outside, for being out in the garden, and the best way to do that is just come outside frequently. Your question was, what do we hope happens after they leave the garden? What we hope happens, and actually we have a lot of stories of this happening, is the students will get very excited about the garden and they will come home and they will talk to their parents about it. And if they grew vegetables, they'll talk to their parents about, oh, we pulled carrots out, and start encouraging parents to also include more vegetables in their meals because they see that their kids are excited about it. So that's one of the aspects of our mission that seems to be working.
Very cool. Fred Daniels, I know that in your work with Growing Home, you all are doing a lot of really innovative ways, or promoting a lot of innovative ways, connecting food production to career development, and helping people that are engaged in your programs to leave with new employment opportunities that maybe they didn't have before, and also a new sense of connection with food and how it's produced. So can you talk a little bit about some examples that you know of, or what you've seen about how learning about food can actually be something that's economically empowering in terms of new job opportunities?
All right, like a lot of people that come through our program at Growing Home move on into like the food industry, or some dealing with food like restaurants or Whole Foods or local food or Goodness Green. It's like places like that. And on the farm they get the actual experience of how to properly weigh, how to pack up things, as well as like the harvest. And they also move on into landscaping because we do a lot of landscaping as well.
That's great, and I know that something that I hope you all noticed, Fred is featured in some of the photographs that are in the back. And as I was reading the descriptions, I was again reminded about the newsworthy buzz item of the Whole Foods moving into Englewood, and I know that Growing Home is going to be working with them directly. Do you see that as something that's really that's exciting and is a success for Growing Home? Do you see that as generating and further perpetuating all the new opportunities for people that are learning about food production?
Yep, I think that's a wonderful thing, Whole Food coming into Inglewood, and it also be another way to help generate more jobs as well as like to sell produce and get more produce into the community. But to bring actual jobs is amazing. So
it helps complete the loop, right, of the training that you're doing, and then right into the food sales system.
yeah.
Great, thank you. Fred Carter, in your work with the Black Oak Center for Sustainable and Renewable Living, I know that you're promoting a sense of, or encouraging sustainability and kind of an environmental and ecosystems look at food production. I think that that's a really powerful linkage, food production and environmental stewardship. What further opportunities do you see in Chicago and in Chicago's communities to help people make that linkage?
The opportunity of actually recognizing that it's not a fragment. Chicago is not separate from the surrounding environment. And that's the challenge and the opportunity for us to begin to recognize that when we talk about a food system, that's what our commitment is around the food system. It includes the whole ecological system around Chicago. So that's the opportunity for me, because 70% of humanity lives in urban settings, and they establish policies. But what feeds the 70% is outside of the area that the 70% lives in. So the people in the city are designing policies unknown, and maybe we're not even conscious of, that impacts rural communities. So it's important that the urban environment become more conscious of the power that we have in setting policies that impacts agriculture. And without being conscious of that, it's like you said earlier about seeds for the future. Who is going to be planting the seed? We're going to plant the seed, or the same structure going to continue planting the seeds. So that's for us the opportunity of us actually recognizing our connectedness. Not like we say, just not a garden. The power is in the whole ecological system. Chicago is a powerful system, but Chicago sits in a microsystem. And so when people here recognize how powerful they are in establishing policies, like the gentleman said earlier, from eating, but also psychologically. So we begin to recognize the value of agriculture, because without agriculture, none of us could be sitting here now. So it's the primary source of what we know as life. So the city, once they become conscious of that, you talk about major paradigm shifts. I would love to see more of that conversation than what I'm seeing now. Because without that, it's like a window of opening for that to occur, because right now I think it's only 3 to 5% of agriculture using biological systems. The rest of it's chemical based. So we need to move as quickly as we can to be more conscious of how powerful we are. We're magnificent in the city. Huge driving, consume a lot, but set policies. So we need to really do everything we can. And that's the future that I can see. Is the awakening of the city to how powerful they are. And that would shift everything.
And to kind of further that idea, and I think actually that links nicely with Steve's work as well as Fred's work, is that something that you see starting with youth? Is that where we should get in at the ground level and work with them to educate about those policies that you're talking about?
The youth has a time when we got to begin with the adults. The adults are setting policy. We need to get out of that thing about the kids. You know, this whole thing about the kids is just a misdirection of energy. We are setting policies, not my baby. If I don't set a policy and shift policy now, my children has no future. So it's really, I'm not separate from the child. Is what I'm trying to distinguish.
Sure.
So when we talk about our kids, yeah, we've been doing it with children that's what drove us to start this whole thing, is the babies. But not the babies that I'm shooting down the line 20 years in the future. We got to fall on the knife ourselves, right? Because if we don't, our children has no future. So that's another conversation I have a personal concern with, this direction about the children, and the adults are not doing anything. If the adults, it's like even the school program, you can train the children, but the adults undermine whatever you train. You can do the garden and everything, and the parents, they go home, they kind of shift. So we got to do everybody. So the children are separate from the parents, so we got to educate the parents too, right? And parents adults can relearn.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
And I think that most of the parents in the room would say that their kids teach them a lot every single day, new things every single day. So maybe a good way to get into those adults is at the ground, at the level we used to. Eliza, your work with Windy City Harvest has taken you all over the city, it looks like, over 200 communities and schools, 4 youth farm sites. So you've seen a lot of variety all over the place in your work. I'm interested to know from you, with all of these different groups that you've engaged with, what are some of the preconditions for them being really excited about this food stuff? What do you see as being the fertile ground, again, no pun intended, for starting these types of programs and having them ignite?
Sure. I just want to step back a little bit and comment on what Fred said. And I think that along with the power of one of the big central places where power is centralized in the city, in urban areas, or in the cultural institutions. And I think it's a really interesting. It's interesting that the Chicago Botanic Garden, which is such a regionally, nationally, and even internationally well-known cultural institution, is located right here at the Chicago right here in Illinois, and we've had over a million visitors last year, and every one of those million people is an opportunity to tell the story of food and how it impacts our environment. Should I lean back? Forward? Fred, can I snuggle with you? So, and the Chicago Botanic Garden is just one cultural institution. When you think about all the Museum of Science and Industry, what's the story of food that they're telling? The Art Institute, what's the story of food they're telling? The Field Museum, what's the story of food they're telling? The Shed Aquarium, what's the planetarium? What is the story? What is the story about food? All of those cultural institutions are telling, and I think that the Chicago Botanic Garden has made a huge commitment to telling the story about food and how it impacts our environment through our Windy City Harvest Department. And it doesn't. I think you're absolutely right, Fred, that we can't just focus on youth. There's people who are interested in this at all ages, and if there's no place for them to access more education and training about it, then we are selling ourselves short for sure. That's why the Chicago Botanic Gardens Windy City Harvest Department kind of focuses on, you asked what's necessary for this to take hold. Well, I think it's taken hold everywhere. I don't think there's a community in Chicago that's not interested in food and feeding. There's not a parent who's not interested in feeding their kid healthy food. There's not a that's available on a regular basis. I think that that interest is there. What's maybe lacking are 3 things: access, education, and training. And that's what the Windy City Harvest Department is trying to, and everyone here is really trying to do. And what every community should have is access, locally grown, sustainably grown food that's affordable and available year-round. Education, why this food is important, what's different about this food than the food that I'm picking up at McDonald's, I'm not gonna roll McDonald's under the bus, at a fast food restaurant, anyone. That's low-hanging fruit, as we say. And then how do if I'm interested in doing this, how do I become a part of this movement? How do I get involved? How do I get a job in this as jobs are becoming less and less available in some of the traditional industries that have sustained the middle class in our city and beyond? So, I don't know, I went off on a little bit of a tangent, but.
Shamar, Shamar is joining us, which is great. So, one more panelist whose innovative work is in your bio sheet too.
So something that is actually up on the wall with the photography exhibit in the back that I was reminded by Leslie is that food is personal and public. And as Wes said this morning, it's also cultural. So I'm interested to know from Shamar and his work with youth from Arab and African American Muslim communities. What are your thoughts on how religious and cultural beliefs influence a community's engagement with the food system, and how can we encourage activism in these groups as well?
Well, first and foremost, I want to apologize for being late. I had a situation with my daughter this morning, speaking of youth, young people, right? They keep you up at night, and she's 14 months, and she's doing amazing things right now, so I apologize completely. Again, and of course, I want to, in respect to this beautiful panel, respect all of your work and your efforts that you're doing around food, and just the intersection of food, activism, culture. Our work pertaining to kind of the more spiritual and religious and looking at the food from many different intersections. When it comes to corner stores, is what we really wanted to focus in on. This was and we focus in geographically on the south and west sides of Chicago, specifically because of the areas that are really desolate, and it permeates a lot of corner stores that people look to as grocery stores. As we all know the story of a large disinvestment of big box stores abandoning these neighborhoods. And so what we wanted to really address was 4 things really within our campaign. Really was to look at literally the relationship between the store owners and residents, both young and adults, not just young people, but young and adults who actually frequent these spaces, and even gas stations. And we did like a preliminary study, attitudinal study in 2007 that really looked at how the corner store owner was actually upkeeping the business and looking at the residents on how they felt about the stores they were shopping at. And from the corner store perspective, he felt like he had a good running business as long as rats, roaches, and water wasn't leaking from the roof. Right. And I keep my store packed. And then from the residents' perspective, everybody felt like it was 50-50. People didn't like the stores, but at the same time, people felt like they were getting healthier options. But the healthier options was the cordyceps juices, the Flamin' Hots, and all of the other sugar-sweetened beverages that exist in these corner stores and dominate GMO products that dominate these stores. So from that survey, we had to go back and look at it, that it wasn't just this idea of the liquor store in the neighborhood being the intersection of violence, but at the same time, the lack of education and the abandonment of a lot of big box stores that really usually would carry some of these products that allow people to actually purchase them. We understood that there was a huge disconnect between the store owner and the residents and just what they were actually eating and what the store owners were buying and putting in their stores. So we really wanted to attack this issue from more of a around racial ethnic tension that looked at more cultural practices from the store owner and really agitating the store owner from a spiritual perspective and saying that how are you actually doing business in neighborhoods when your customer bases are your stakeholders. And we've always had to intervene around this issue one way or another. So we came up with an idea early, like in the mid-90s, that really asked the store owners, if the residents was to become part, owners of your store because they keep you alive, would you be willing to really work with the community? And, he never got back to us after that question. So we knew that we had to really heal some of the tensions that existed there and really begin to train community residents on marshaling this idea about reimagining your corner store, reimagining your stores in your neighborhood as really viable small businesses. I know these stores often get left out of the larger conversation when you start talking about really reimagining. And I know we're getting Whole Foods in Inglewood soon, and so we're still trying to argue the fact that small businesses can still be viable and they can still carry the type of products that we want to see, but at the same time, you can do more with these stores. So we've done everything from what we call corner store ciphers. We brought, drummers all the way from Malaysia, local artists. We have conversations with the store owners about him even reimagining his store. So now, for the very first time, the store owner is a part of the larger conversation because they're often being demonized and targeted and saying that, your businesses are the reasons why these communities exist and operate the way that they do. So this, and take it that we all understand that some folks don't know, but most folks do now more, work around corner stores and research is being produced, that a lot of these store owners don't come from MBA backgrounds or, they don't come from Northwestern. These are like, this is middleman minority situations. So they're getting stores handed down from their cousins. They're getting stores, and you really inherited a legacy, a family legacy of, look, I want to come to America, I want to make a way for myself, and then they end up in these unfortunate situations where the dynamics around the stores look totally different than what they can really, how they can really operate. And they're really just operating the way they know how, right? And a lot of time people don't know their background and their history. So that's one aspect that we really looked at this larger issue across the South and West Side. The other piece was food access, obviously. There was a huge advocacy component around really trying to incentivize ways that these stores can really sustain fresh products. And we were definitely pushing legislation back in 2011 that would allow some of the funds from the Fresh Food Funds, Illinois Fresh Food Fund, to allow stores to carry more products and they can get they can get money from the grant side than the loan side, because it's hard for them to really operate within a system where they have to really think about going through the process of getting small micro loans to really incentivize their stores. So this was one of the ways that we was thinking that we can work with both city and state to come up with some unique policies that allow these stores to begin to open up the idea of carrying more products and sustaining that. And of course, working with local sources around Inglewood. There's a lot of urban ag entities in Inglewood, and really starting with Inglewood was our concentrated area. The other part of it was the education, and the education wasn't just about the health and wellness, the nutrition, the healthier lifestyle. It was more so too about really training residents, again, to hold these stores accountable and understanding not just what you're buying in the stores, but really what should be in the store, what you should want to see in the store, right? And what your children who actually is practicing this, these local, these primary food groups or what they should be eating should actually be in the stores. And one of the things that we do every summer during the month of Ramadan is we actually, bring in a local source and we what's the word I'm looking for? My mind is everywhere. But we were looking for to really discount organic produce and sell it at a discounted rate and allow the owner to really see that there's a clear demand. And every summer is sold out. And obviously it kind of decimated this idea of people don't want this stuff, they want this. So when we tried this for the first 2 years, the store owners really gravitated towards it, but the problem was them actually finding sources to buy fresh produce and to be able to afford it, because they're operating at razor thin margins. So they knew that if I buy this stuff, this is a risk, I'm gonna take a loss. And so we really had to sit with them and think about more, cooperative buying models to really allow them to buy more so they can stock more. And it's really to their best interest if they're working together as a collective. Because there's no real Arab League store, business league that they've really can form. So we're trying to really work with a lot of the stores to really think about how they can carry more products by cooperatively buying produce. And then the other piece is really this idea of really taking these stores and making them institutions where we can organize out of. And really, I thought this was a really great opportunity when we went through the first 5 years of this campaign, because nobody was using these corner stores as sites for education when it comes to elections, voter registration, when it comes to people convening at the corner stores, really using these stores as shared space for the community to actually meet. A lot of stores started to really, move around a lot of their products, move around their store, and make it more available for people to come in and actually reimagine the store with the store owner. So we're doing a lot more than just thinking about food access. We're trying to introduce the culture, the relationship. We're trying to think about policy, and we're trying to really heal what exists between, primarily African American residents and the corner stores.
Thank you for sharing all that detail. It sounds to me that that's a really inventive and creative way of looking at a problem, and the way that you all have brought in kind of like an unlikely partner in that circumstance by looking at the corner store owner as someone who maybe didn't think of themselves as being a provider to their community, more just a provider of a service to a consumer, make them start thinking about themselves in a different way. I think that that's a really amazing strategy. And I would actually invite the rest of the panel, from your experiences and your work, can you think of an example of where you've maybe engaged an unlikely partner in this conversation to help bring new life to food access issues, to food production issues, to food education? I don't know if anyone wants to jump on that right off the bat.
I'm not going to say that it's an unlikely partner, but it was a heretofore untapped partner, and that's WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, which is a supplemental feeding program focused on nutrition education and breastfeeding education. And in addition to getting coupons, kind of like SNAP, that you can go to the grocery store and purchase food, you can also get, WIC also, the state distributes farmers market coupons, lots of them every year. And what we found by talking with our friends at WIC is that the redemption rate for these coupons is very, very low. I mean, it's between 35, well, mostly the average is 35% around the different sites where they were being distributed, which is a huge missed opportunity for farmers, service providers, and moms alike. So what we said is, what can we do as educators and farmers to help fill that gap? And what we did was we said, well, we were having a farm stand outside after the moms got their coupons that they could come out and spend their coupons on, but it wasn't, we would get like $20 in coupons every time. And so what we thought is, we said, well, we're not going to do this partnership anymore. And WIC said, no, we're going to do this partnership. How can we make it better? And what we found is that we had to be even closer than 20 feet away. We had to be like 5 feet away, and the food had to be 5 feet away, and the exchange had to be much more straightforward. So what we did is, our youth, instead of having the WIC dietitian or nutritionist give the educational spiel, our youth farms were giving the spiel, and then the moms could exchange, that they could talk about the work that they were doing, share a recipe that they liked, talk about how WIC had benefited them, and then it was a much more, and then here's a box of the stuff that we're growing, and here's what it is, and here's how you cook with it. And once that education and training happened, and the access was there, then it was, here's my coupons, here's your box, this food is going home. And what happened was that CETA, who was a great partner in Cook County, their redemption rate went from 35% to 65%. Which was huge. So that told us that the moms who needed the food and wanted the food were actually getting the food. Whereas it wasn't enough to say, here's coupons, find a farmer's market somewhere. It's like there has to be much more deliberate leading in education, and that has been really successful.
Well, I mean, we haven't had a lot of unlikely partnerships, but I will say, in our work with the kitchen community, something I've discovered is, there are systems and there are people, individuals. And so you have like your principal, your parents, your teachers, these are all roles. But who the individuals are in those roles and what motivates them is really where, building those relationships, that's really where we've been most successful. Like in one school, there's just like a community member who's just really into the whole movement and has, actively motivated several teachers in the garden just from his own passion. Whereas at another school, it's a neighborhood school, the main teacher doesn't live in the neighborhood, but she has engaged the 8th graders, and so over the summer, the 8th graders will come to the garden independently and take care of it. So what we've found as far as partnerships go is who the individuals are at each unique school is really what makes it go and what generates interest and puts the movement forward.
All right. For us, it's pretty much like outreach in the community, because a lot of times you can grow things, but if people not educated about these certain greens and vegetables, they won't know what to do with it because it's something like they not used to. And like for my granny, when I started like at growing home, I never knew things about like Swiss chard, arugula, kale, because we was used to collards, mustards, turnips. So I'd be like, Granny, do you eat Swiss chard? You eat kale? And I bring it home. She, boy, I don't eat that. Then I prepare it. And she eat it. And she asking me, now, when you going to bring me some more of that kale to Swiss chard? So sometimes it's more like educating people. And we do that through outreach because we really got to get out there and explain things to people. And then we have like on-site cooking demos. So not only is we telling you, hey, you should buy this Swiss chard because it's high in vitamin K or all this, we showing you how to actually prepare it and take it home. And people seem to like it. Like he was mentioning like Flamin' Hots. It's other ways, like you can make kale chips. And a lot of people didn't like them, but when they actually make it and eat it, they like it, and it's something new. So outreach is everything. You gotta really put in work, and we like got amazing people who actually do this, that we can go from selling less, because starting something new, it's gonna take time, but you can go from, hey, I sold $100 to now $1,000, but you gotta be willing to put in the work and reach the people as well as the kids, and it works, just take time.
We have a CSA called a Healthy Food Hub, which is really, we have over 500 members. And in the CSA, we have educational forums that are going on all the time around reading foods, children running around, but the real engagement is to get the community to recognize the possibility of food healing our community. That has been a major task. And so educating people that food is a doorway to health, but also a doorway to financial prosperity. It's one of the areas that, but specifically the community I grew up in, the associated memory to growing food and slavery is a big thing. But the disconnect to that is not the recognition of why that occurred was because of your magnificent capacity to grow food. So it's like reinterpreting the experience that have children be powerful and adults, not so painful about a past history around food, and getting more re-engaged in it, because this community I'm talking about, the health disparity has a lot to do with what we eat. Everybody does, right? But getting past the barrier of painful association around the plants, the soil of growing the food. And that's not just here, it's worldwide. We've had people to come out to our place from other parts of the world experiencing the same problem because of colonialism and the association to certain groups around food. And if you look at the health disparity in all those communities, basically the same. So how do you re-engage people into seeing the power of food is really the kind of commitment that we all have to be, because the financial cost, the health cost, the liability to the environment and everybody is so huge. So engaging the parents, because most parents remember, even in Chicago when the food was better. I mean, if you're 30 years old, there was times 30 years ago the food was better than what it is now. I'm 64, I can definitely remember. I remember when there was fresh foods. I can remember when there was a cart, a guy on a horse and buggy. The watermelon man, we used to call him, that was riding up and down the streets on a real buggy, selling foods, which later on became illegal. But so it's really reconnecting people to what we always was connected to, and that's the land, and honoring that, and that's a very healing component. Because at the end of the day, we're really only talking about our health, and that's the course that we need to really put emphasis on, our health. So the food with the children, and then the other thing too, we look at food only from one paradigm. But food and agriculture is major, because you got not only food, you got fiber, the clothing that we're wearing today, right? That's an industry that we've outsourced, and we're not looking at that now. That's an industrial possibility. Then you can look at food from fuel. We made biofuels, so food can be a source of energy. Food can be a source of geological education, because we got an energy problem. So getting the children to re-engage to the possibility of what food can be in all those areas, from energy, fiber, and health, is like a real commitment that we all kind of need to, I'd like to say, we all need to do a little more in, because if you look at the health disparity in Chicago, and you look at crime, that we call crime, and look at the food system over the last 40 years, there's a correlation to what we eat and my behavior. We did an after-school program at King, and I would do training in permaculture. And when the children took the break, they had breaks, and they went and started eating hots. And when they would come back in, they was ate sugar, foods, all that. They was off the chain. So food is very critical in getting everybody to be more conscious of what we ingest and biologically express itself. And our babies can really get it. And the parents really knows, they just don't have the vehicle to do that. So
I was just wondering if you guys could comment, like, you know, there's kind of the barrier of people thinking of our soil being sort of ruined because it's dirty or there's lead, or I don't know what's in there. And I kind of don't know how much of it's true or who needs to worry about it. Like, do I need to worry about it in the suburbs? Does everyone need to worry about that? Is that a big barrier to people wanting to grow food in their backyards or in urban areas?
soil, the land, everybody should worry about what's in the soil. Whether you're in Chicago, urban or rural, it's a problem. We got soil erosion, but you can mitigate that, right? And so urban setting, that's why the inputs are so expensive in urban settings when doing urban gardening, because of the soil. So I would be alarmed. I'm always alarmed about the soil, because soil is life. And if the soil is contaminated, so whatever I'm eating, not only what I'm eating, when I'm walking on, the children walk on this soil, right? They walk away with something. We do too. So it's important that the soil is the very foundation of everything that we do. And so we need to be, I'm alarmed all the time.
And it can never hurt to just do a quick, there's resources for quick lead, I mean really lead, arsenic, mercury are the biggest ones that you need to worry about beyond, and it's relatively inexpensive to do a test if you're concerned. We kind of recommended, the default in Chicago is raised beds and imported soil. But in the suburbs, if you're still concerned about it, then it's relatively easy to do a soil test to check your heavy metals levels.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with that. And we always bring in soil, especially when you're just starting out. It's nice to know where it came from. It's an additional cost, but like you were saying, like the soil is everything. And maintaining that, like you're not going to have good crops if you don't have good soil and are caring for it every year. Whenever you're growing food, you're pulling out of the soil, and so also as part of the growing food process, and I think everyone knows that you got to think about what you're putting back in, into the soil annually with those cycles. You guys have a really good story where didn't you take that whole lot? Isn't it like on like 3 feet of compost or something like that?
Yeah, we basically remediated. So the city actually did it. They came, remediated the space, then added gravel. Then we actually did the raised bed. So it's a lot of different ways you can do it. Some people would say clay or something like that, but it's a lot of different ways. But you raised beds, they prove the work. So
soil is a reflection of our physical health. So if you live in the suburbs, whether you're in the city, the soil is the foundation of our health. So you should be alone.
And when people talk about lead and the soil, how gasoline is called unleaded, it used to be leaded. So there was just like decades of car exhaust that had lead in it. A lot of times people think it's from paint, but most of the like lead you'll find in the soil is from old gasoline, and once it's there, it doesn't really go away.
Thank you for kind of kicking us off with the question and answer. I actually want to turn to the audience now and see if there's questions for our panel. I see. Go ahead.
You really touched upon connecting with adults, and that's really daunting when I hear that, just because daunting is that adults have so many excuses, it's hard to get them to show up, they have so many other things to do. Can you speak to, or what's like an exciting way that you see to effectively get adults to show up so you can talk to them, so you can educate them, whether it be through an institution like a church, a corner store, if there's any other examples of that. How do you reach them if you're trying to educate them on something they may not be thinking about?
Well, for us at the schools, we have the direct link between the students and the parents. There's things like report card pickup day, where every parent is coming through. So a lot of times, schools will organize some sort of event in the garden on report card pickup day. Also, at the beginning of the school year, I think events with music and food, and some people have even gotten like those jumping houses, just an opportunity to gather and celebrate and making it fun. Like part of why we use gardens as a way to engage students and parents, maybe not for everyone, but the gardening bug is very powerful if you can get over that initial hump of I've never done it before. Because once you do start getting your hands dirty, and once you see the fruits of your labor, that can be very therapeutic and something that you continue to come back to. But the direct answer I would say to your question is, celebrate. Opportunities to gather with music and food, and casual ways to engage folks and generate, again, excitement and enthusiasm.
I would also say, meeting people where they're at. That's what worked with us with WIC. You're not going to get moms, working moms in general. I mean, just with your, having a little baby. It's like your time is limited. I'm not going to go. I care about this stuff a lot. I'm not going to go to a healthy cooking class on a Wednesday night. I'm not going to do it. I'm busy. I got a job. I got kids. I got school commitments. So that's what we found with WIC. It's like you got to go to the corner stores. That's where people are. To church. That's where people are. They're going to go there anyways, and I think you hit the nail on the head. You got to go to where people already are if you want them to. You can't add another thing on people's plates. I don't think, because people's plates are full up in school.
Yeah,
they got to go to school.
Report card pickup day.
They're
covered. Yeah.
So it's. I don't know.
Well, and something I would add to that actually is that you meet them where they are and you tie it to something that they already care about.
Yeah.
Which, from across this panel, I think we have examples of people, leveraging people's faith and tying into that, leveraging their beliefs about the environment and their place in the world, and getting them to think about this issue alongside that. their kids and how they are interested in feeding their kids in healthy ways. So you capitalize on that, and then employment, jobs. You approach them through that angle. So I think it's meeting people where they are and tacking it on to something that's already one of their priorities, and let them know that this is a uniting factor that they should be considering too.
We've had a number of 200 to 300 parents come to the market, and the reason they come is because there's one primary thing everybody's concerned with is their well-being. So integrating well-being with your children and yourself seem to be one of the things that has adults. Because if you look around, everybody's talking about how I can improve my health. Everybody's having some kind of health challenge, whether it's physical or psychological. And right now there's a high consciousness about eating. Even if you can't afford to eat, people are trying to find ways to better eat around their health and well-being. So I think that integrating health as a paradigm in food and your children's health and their future is a real strong, attractive thing for most adults. No matter what social scale you might be, you're concerned about your well-being. And when you tie the health to it, like we do Qigong classes at our market. There's one sister that comes, she's 75 years old, and she gets out on the floor and they get to shouting on the floor. And then there's belly dancing, women to help belly. It's the weirdest thing. So I mean, they got the babies doing the belly dancing, and all this. It's all about people's well-being. As people really want to be well, and most of us got health problems. So it seemed to be tying the health and the food and your children is a real. And then you include the music, sounds, and festivity into that, it draws crowds. So that's the educational opportunity. Then you can begin the possibility of shifting somebody's paradigm. They're concerned about, well, if you eat this way, that's why you feel so bad, okay? That's why you slept the other day. You had too much coffee last night. So the health part, I think is real, my experience has been that health is a real major thing that we all can draw adults in. These adults, when I break down, no matter how busy I am, I'm gonna find some way to get better.
Well, it really speaks to the policy needs to be changed. Adults change policy,
Right.
and how to get more adults to really care about these issues, critical to really advance all these things we're talking about. So thank you for your response.
Yeah, so policies is real. I don't know. Richard Pryor used to say, "What are you gonna believe? What my lips say, or what your eyes see?" To me, that's what policy is. I'm saying this, but my eyes are saying something else. So parents say this, so we have to look how we can bridge that, what my lips saying and what my body is really doing. We say we're committed to our children, but our actions every day say something else. So getting a parent to really see what that action day to day is sort of reduce that. It collapsed that. And then the parent can start acting differently. That's been my experience. So allowing the person to see the distinction between what my lips are saying and what policy, that's how policy. You can focus on conversation, which is I say policy is conversation. And then you can look at what you're really doing. And what we're really doing is not what policy is. We got some operating practice, even though we got all kind of policies. That's not life affirming. So allowing people to kind of see that, it kind of gives them a tool that they can work with that they didn't have before. And that's why the parents are so important. Because the parents, we are acting against our well-being.
I was just curious to take the policy point. All of you are running programs that intersect with local, municipal, federal policy. And we certainly want our audiences, both here and mine, to get behind supporting policy that helps expand your work. And I would be curious from any of you, if you could share say one policy change that would help you. Fred Daniels, when we met, you talked about your grandmother wanting to plant a garden on some vacant land and being told 20 years ago
Yeah.
that that land was going to be used by CPS and it's still vacant,
Yeah.
and she had to get rid of her garden. You know, I would just be curious for any of you, what are the kinds of policies that you think we could support that would help your work?
We were talking about soil earlier, and I mean, the creation of soil and the creation of healthy soil in the city is pretty limited, and due to policies right now about composting and food waste and the dealing of food waste. And I think that would be having, just keeping that dialogue open about composting policy and working with the Chicago Food Policy Advisory Council and the Advocates for Urban Agriculture on continuing urban composting, so we can continue, so the soil issue doesn't become a limiting factor for folks who want to have access to be able to grow their own food. Because really, you're not going to go out and pay $35 a cubic yard plus $100 for delivery if you want to have a small scale backyard garden. It's limited.
Since food is a commodity, commodities are controlled by corporations, which sets the policies through the federal government. If we could change that policy.
Give me the
I mean, change that, so, I mean, if you look at that policy, it trickles down into the city.
Yeah.
So the land is controlled by the corporate thing, so you can't use it, don't take nothing off my distribution shelf. You know, if you start growing food and it's not going through my system, I don't like that, right? So what do we do about that? That's the real background that nobody wants to talk about, even in urban settings, even in the rural. Who owns that? And due to policies around city ordinance and all that, it's still coming from the commoditizing of food, which is controlled by the government, which is controlled by corporations. So how do we as human beings disrupt that? If we could figure out how to change the commoditizing of food as a policy, that would take the corporate power out of food, and then no one can tell you that you can't grow food to feed yourself without a license. So if you have to have a license because of code to grow food, you know, something's wrong with that picture to me. So if we can change that part, it would be radical. You know, food would be a right. You know, that would be it's a right that I can grow and eat and feed my family if I have to. I can't afford to buy it. Now you're telling me I can't even grow it.
So Eliza's telling us that you know, stay local, composting, things that are going on in the city about growing food. That's where we should look. Sounds like Fred is telling us to go big, go national, and tackle the big monsters. The rest of the panel, do you guys have any comments to Leslie's question?
I'll just say keep supporting like local farm, because that's like a main thing. Like you can build a farm, but if people not supportive of it, it won't thrive anyway. So it's like we can work hard to like grow the food, but if don't nobody coming by, it's like so much energy going into it, and everybody want healthy food. So it'll be best to like thrive more into that of why it's so important to eat healthy, or why should I eat this kale salad versus this burger or fried chicken. So
Vote with your fork.
Yeah. And I know there's this, and forgive me, I don't have the name. I think it's like Chicago Food Policy Network. But there is an initiative to, you know, the city itself, our local government, does purchase a lot of food, particularly through the school system. And so getting the local government to make a commitment to have a certain percentage of the food that they're buying come from local sources. There is an initiative to kind of push that through. I know both candidates, Emmanuel and Garcia, have submitted statements of support of some sort of policy like that. But I do think like local procurement policy, especially because it is our tax dollars, and if we do want to see it stay locally, you know, that's something we can influence on the municipal.
Push our local institutions to reflect what we value. Go ahead, Shamar.
No, I would say, I mean, you know, I think finding more creative policies at the city level to really look at, again, making smaller retail spaces part of the larger conversation when it comes to food. Again, we're like one of the very few entities that's keeping that aspect alive. Even when we're part of those larger conversations with the city, we actually have a partnership where we're an appointed organization that they're modeling our campaign after within the city, and really looking at how small businesses really play a large role, other than just trying to bring big box stores into the neighborhood and low-income neighborhoods. And again, it's really been a struggle that when we approach these store owners and you ratchet up all of this great work and this energy around this idea, this concept, but they themselves can't benefit from SPIF or TIF because of there's not enough TIF money that to be able to look at small micro loans or other type of business loans that can be available that allow them to take advantage of even store expansion, cosmetics. These things really play a part. Although I'm a huge fan of urban agriculture, and it's something that's here that we should be looking at. Also, we shouldn't forget that this is a large transformation for community residents that live in these neighborhoods to start farming, right? This idea of I'm going to go from buying my food at an actual store to actually growing my food, and trying to permeate a different type of culture around health and wellness. Again, that takes time, because again, a lot of times residents are still, looking at food externally as just something that should be cheap in these neighborhoods, and yet my products that I wear, my clothes and everything should be the expensive stuff that I wear. So the level of education that it takes to get people to understand the viability of, you can actually control stores in your neighborhood. It doesn't have to look like the north side, but it definitely, we can come up with a different type of model. So it takes creative and innovative policies that we've been working with the city to really think about. But at the same time, if we can find ways to incentivize smaller businesses to want to do this and to want to carry more options, or even partnering with local, more urban agricultural entities to be able to get these products and be able to dominate, like Frito-Lay when they come into the stores.
Don't forget about the smaller players in this game. Make sure that they're engaged, that they have opportunity as well to make decisions. I think that we're probably at time. I hope that you all have enjoyed this last panel. I know that I have. You've left me thinking about all the different ways and all the different links in this food chain where we can all be starting to ignite the change that we want to see. Leslie, I don't know if you have any final comments, or if you...
Can I do a shameless plug really quick?
Oh, yeah, do a shameless plug.
Shameless plugging time. If anyone's interested in learning about how to be more, or learning the technical aspects of being a small-scale urban farmer, Windy City Harvest actually does training on that in distinct weekend workshops. So I have a flyer up here. Home-scale aquaponics, small farm crop planting, seed starting for edible, small farm season extension, building healthy soil, and if someone's interested in that. So come out. They're reasonably priced and short and add much to your plate. So thank you.
I just want to I want to distinguish something between policy and reality. Now, there was a bill that was passed that came from the community about urban agriculture. When it got to Springfield, we was excited, right? But we noticed it disappeared. We didn't know why it disappeared, but what happened, the lobbyists from the major industry rewrote that bill. So I started thinking, my God, we put all this time and energy into policy. All our energy, so policy, we have to work with policy, but at the same time, we have to do something. Okay? So we gotta work with policy, knowing that they may change policy because of the political interest. But the work that we gotta do is to make sure that we cover our behind as community, as people, because the people that are doing the policy are in collapse. And they telling us down the line where our food system is falling apart, right? So we have to begin to actually build local food systems that are community-based. Because the current policy-driven system is based on a just-in-time food system that's commoditized and international. And it's in collapse. And we can spend 10 years fighting them and we'll starve to death. So policy and what we really do. We know we gotta have warriors beating down the halls of Congress, right? But while they're doing that, I'm assuming that we need to be building a safety net. Because our food system is in collapse. Now that's one, you can't look at what they're saying, look at what's real. Look at your purse, number one, and look at the quality of what you're getting. Something is going on. While we're fighting the policy battle, even with the city, we still need to have grassroots action that we do now while we're doing policy. So, policy is great. We need to fight it, but we got to do something.
We got a lot of work to do.